I will send Congress a budget that will create new jobs in manufacturing and energy and innovation and infrastructure.
Yippee! But how will he pay for it?
We'll pay for every dime of it by cutting unnecessary spending.
Give me a break. They never cut anything. This budget asks for billions more for things like universal preschool.
It is right for America.
Billions more for infrastructure.
But you need to fund these projects.
But we're already $17 trillion in debt. Must government spending only go up?
This is federal spending per person since America began. It started low, less than 5% of the economy. Here's World War I. Here's World War II. Used to go down after wars, but now, even in peacetime, it only goes up. Pretty soon, we're up here. How are we going to pay for that?
And what happened to the trillions they've already spent?
Shovel ready was not as shovel ready as we expected.
Hey, big spenders, there's a better way. That's our show tonight.
And now, John Stossel.
Another year, another new budget, another plan to increase spending, this time by $250 billion. Does the new budget include a plan to prevent America's bankruptcy by addressing the biggest budget buster? No, not a peep about that. This new budget's about spending more. Investment, the big spenders call it. And that's ridiculous, says Congressman Mike Pompeo. Congressman, what's ridiculous? Investment is good. It grows the economy.
John, thanks for having me on the show tonight. You know, big spenders always call taking money from you and me and handing it to someone they prefer. They'll always call that investment. That's not how I learned it in my 20 years in business before I came to Congress. This president's plan is worse than more of the same. It's going to take the debt to $25 trillion over the course of the next decade. He'll have piled on more debt.
The budget says that. The president acknowledges that.
That's right. That's his plan. That's his intended outcome. Frankly, John, you and I know it'll end up worse, right? Not a single proposal about what the real risk for the Affordable Care Act is, how much money Obamacare will ultimately spend, not a peep about entitlement programs and how to tackle them. And on top of that, enormous tax increases, which will reduce growth for the American economy. Frankly, the best way to climb out of our debt is to get the economy kick-started again. Eventually, John, if you kick the can down the road too long, you end up holding the can and begging for money, and that's where America's going to find itself.
It sounds appealing, though. Loan guarantees, $2 billion to promote efficiency and renewable energy.
John, I've seen these renewable energy stories for my entire time in Congress. I've fought against them with incredible energy myself. You know, they tell you in one breath how great solar is and how great wind is, and then they tell you in the next breath, and I can make it even better if I can just take more taxpayer money and put it in my pocket. This isn't the way the American economy ought to work. We shouldn't be picking winners and losers, and most of this money will end up wasted with no benefit to the American people.
You referenced the future $25 trillion debt. Do you think Americans understand the debt? I worry that they don't, because when I ask them about it, they say things like this.
Should government spend more to help people?
Of course, government should always be spending to help people.
I think that the government should always be trying to help people.
They just believe we can spend, and that's the way to help people.
John, I'll tell you, I hope those were outliers in the group you went to see.
No, not everybody I asked. No,
I'll tell you, when I'm back in Kansas, folks get the core principle. They get that you cannot spend more money than you take in forever. They get the idea that they're behaving responsibly in their own lives, and the government needs to do that too. But it's incumbent upon folks like me, elected leaders, to shoot straight and to tell them the truth. There's things the government's just got to do less of. We've got to make some decisions that are difficult, and when we do that, great outcomes will happen. If we take less of their money, they'll make really good decisions, we'll grow our economy, and we'll get the nation back on the right track. Spending is not the right solution. We don't have an austerity budget today. We've got a budget that's spending money like no nation has ever done in the history of mankind.
Thank you, Congressman Pompeo.
Thank you, John.
Now we turn to two policy wonks, one from the right and one from the left. Rowena Baccia from the Heritage Foundation and Bryce Covert from Think Progress. Now, policy wonks, don't get too wonky. If you do, I'm going to blow this wonk horn. But Bryce, I'll start with you because you disagree with me and the congressman. Well, how do we get it wrong?
Well, I think that when you're looking at a budget document like Obama's, and, you know, first of all, he keeps saying it's about values. We are pretty sure this isn't going to pass anytime soon, given the Congress we have. But it's about deciding where you invest and how you pay for it. And so it's not like he's deciding to do all this new spending and won't pay for any of it. A lot of it is paid for. He's
with
decided,
higher taxes.
With higher taxes. But it's also not just, you know, a tax raise for everyone in the country or even all of our wealthy people. It's specifically targeted at, say, money that multinational corporations take overseas, and therefore they can avoid U.S. taxes.
Assuming that'll work and they won't dodge it and it'll bring the money in. But what about the debt going up to $25 trillion? Doesn't that scare you?
Well, the deficit, you know, the difference between the debt we have and the money that's coming in is actually falling right now. It fell at the fastest rate last year in any year we've seen since World War II.
But it's falling from the big stimulus blowout.
Sure, we are coming back down from the stimulus, but another reason that it's falling is because the economy is getting better. Part of the reason that it got bigger during the recession is because people weren't paying as much in taxes because they weren't working. They needed more assistance from unemployment. Those things are getting better. Maybe not as fast as we want them to get better, but that really helps improve our fiscal situation.
Romina, she calls this investment. It says we can pay for it with these new taxes.
Well, the deficit is really a short-term phenomenon. The fact that it's falling, it's going back up, and by the end of the decade, it'll be over $1 trillion again. And if you look at what's even scarier,
briefly falling, and then my age group retires.
But interest on the debt is exploding. It is going to triple before the end of the decade. By 2020, we'll spend more than $800 billion on interest on the debt alone. That's more than we will be spending on the domestic budget or on the defense budget. So if we don't get the debt under control, there won't be any money to make those investments, whether you agree that the government should make them or the private sector should.
Your think tank came out with this iceberg chart which tries to sort of explain that. You see 17 trillion. By the time my age group is all retired, 205 trillion. There's not enough money in the world.
No, that's the fiscal gap. If you look at what the government has promised in benefits in Medicare and Social Security, Obamacare now, this new entitlement, and what we expect to bring in taxes over the 75-year period, that is what you're looking at. This is the debt that you're not seeing today. But even the debt you're seeing is already more than $55,000 for every American.
Bryce, what about that? Doesn't that just sink us?
Well, let's talk about Social Security. I think it's a good thing to talk about in these long-term entitlements. I think when you talk about Medicaid and Medicare, you have to talk about health care in this country. We pay too much for health care. There is a problem there. I would say that the Affordable Care Act is a step toward trying to reform that system and make it not cost as much. You may not agree, but I think that that's a health care problem. Social Security, on the other hand, there's actually a really easy fix to make it fiscally solvent for the next 75 years, and that's just to lift the cap on taxes that are paid. A lot of wealthy people actually are not going to end up paying taxes on their income into Social Security this year because there's a very low cap. If we lifted it, we'd be fiscally solvent.
Tax the rich.
That's it always. Tax and spend more. If you lift the cap, what you'll do...
Look how rich they are.
Yeah, but what you'll do, you'll bring in surplus revenue now, which the government will spend like it's done in the past. If the Social Security Trust Fund actually held any real assets, we wouldn't be talking about Social Security having a deficit and causing a problem for the budget. But because we know that the government spend all the money, and that's what we do, what would happen if we lift the cap? The revenue will come in, it'll go right out the door, and what will it spend? Special interest project. It won't go towards our priorities. It won't go towards basic research, infrastructure, the things that you perhaps think are important, but special interest is driving all this spending in Washington, which is why spending caps are so important.
I'm skeptical of your think tank and some of your ideas about this because I look at what you guys have said in the past. The sequester was something that really, that's the reason the deficit went down, in addition to the fact that it was past this big blowout stimulus. Think progress on that. Economic havoc and suffering will ensue if they allow the cuts to go into effect. They went into effect. I didn't see the chaos and suffering. As many as 600,000 children and pregnant women could lose access to food and health care. Give me a break.
Actually, there was quite a lot of suffering. It may not have been quite as bad as we thought. A lot of government agencies were able to find short-term ways to blunt that blow that we were all expecting. But a lot of kids were kicked out of Head Start, and talked to their parents about what they did with their children when they were trying to get to work. You know, I talked to domestic violence shelters who had to shut their doors and couldn't help women. A lot of it impacted low-income people, and I think that doesn't make as much news.
We didn't see it on the news? The reporters are all with you. You'd think they would have pointed this stuff out.
Local news definitely covered it, but I think it wasn't a national story because it didn't impact necessarily everyone. You know, it's people who rely on Head Start. It's a smaller number.
Not that the dependence on government is exaggerated?
I think that it wasn't necessarily exaggerated. It was a different projection, and then we saw some real pain hit. And also, we haven't actually changed all that pain. We cut ourselves into this hole where we were starving a lot of programs, long-term things like scientific research. A lot of people had to shut down those programs during sequestration, and they're actually not getting enough relief. They're going to continue suffering this year.
$3.5 trillion isn't enough?
We're not giving it to these long-term priorities. I mean, we have to make decisions, right, about where we spend and where we invest.
We rarely seem to. Romina, I'm monopolized.
Yeah, I think that the spending caps are working. First of all, let's talk about how small they are. They trim about 2.5% off of spending. Very small.
Some of the sequester is still left.
Yeah, they're very small. And if we're talking about Head Start, the Obama administration put out a study just recently that showed that the program, despite billions of dollars in taxpayer dollars spent on it, had almost no cognitive effect on those children. So it sounds like a good program, but are we really helping those children, or are we just increasing the burden of government? And all that spending and the higher debt, that drags down the economy, and less growth means fewer opportunities, which hurts low-income Americans the most. We need pro-growth policies that help everyone get jobs and get a true raise.
Now, let's talk about the deficit. That's the big one. You both acknowledge that. Politicians have promised to fix this forever. It never happens. Romina sent us the Heritage Foundation video, which includes clips like this one from the Senate Majority Leader from 15 years ago.
We will expect by the year 2014 to have totally eliminated the debt.
Totally eliminated, and instead it's $17 trillion. Bryce? It's your guy, Tom Daschle.
Long-term projections on our health are hard. I mean, right now we're seeing a much lower deficit than we thought 3-4 years ago. So the picture changes a lot. I think that we are on much better fiscal footing than we thought we were going to be. Like I said, the deficit is actually falling right now.
Fiscal footing? Terrible fiscal footing?
The deficit's coming down.
Better than it's coming down. It's still $600 billion. That's how much more we spend than we collect. Thank you, Bryce and Romina. To keep this conversation going on Facebook or Twitter, use this hashtag over there to let people know what you think. Coming up, President Obama says we should have preschool for all. But is that a good thing? I say it's a bad thing. You may not agree. Next.
I asked this Congress to help states make high-quality pre-K available to every 4-year-old.
Free preschool for every 4-year-old. It's an appealing idea, and everyone I asked liked it. Giving pre-kindergarten to every kid, good idea?
I think education's good. Yeah, I think.
Universal pre-K is great, so long as the taxpayers don't mind paying for it.
Well, many taxpayers do mind paying for it, and I mind for other reasons. Universal pre-K creates a single standard for preschools. That can kill innovation. Also, government preschool crowds out private alternatives that might be better. And while programs like Head Start sound so good to people, the president's own education department studied it and found it didn't work. It helped briefly, but a few years later, there was no effect. Billions of dollars later, it made no difference. So now the president wants to spend more? I say that's crazy. But Nobel Prize winning economist James Heckman says I'm dead wrong. Professor, why?
Well, be careful. I didn't say you were dead wrong in everything you just said.
Oh, good.
I said that there is an economic basis. I did hear a previous segment of your program, and people were talking about investment. And I think this is a case where if there was more evidence of the kind that's been mustered on behalf of preschool for disadvantaged children, you're going to find that the program more than pays for itself in terms of the return, both to the individual and the society. So I think there are some government programs that are investments, like, you know, for example, the interstate highway system, or for example, the transcontinental railroad that link the country together. There are investments that actually do pay off. So I'm completely with you when you say, oh, you know, there's a lot of government waste. But I would say, if people looked at the evidence for other programs the way that we've looked for evidence on this program, then we'd go a long way towards meeting some of your criticisms. But I think this program that we're talking about, these classes of programs, would probably survive it.
Okay, this program, you have studied the Perry preschool and concluded that investment, high-quality investment in preschool brings a return of 7-to-1. And every government preschool supporter cites that 7-to-1 statistic now, including our president.
Every dollar we invest in high-quality early education can save more than $7 later on.
But come on, this was a study of 58 kids 50 years ago, and it was high quality. What are the chances that a government-run education system is going to be universally high quality?
Well, let's be careful. There are several aspects to your argument that need qualification. Nobody said it had to be a strictly government-run program. They're talking about government-financed program. There's a difference between government paying for programs and programs being run by the private sector. I myself have advocated a mix of public and private. So I think you want to separate those two issues. So I'm completely with you that you want to engage. I mean, people like Art Rolnick in Minnesota have actually brought together these privately financed programs and shown some success. So I just want to separate the public-private
distinction. I don't think the president wants private financing. I think he wants the state to run it.
Well, no, I think there's a lot of initiative that can be supported at the individual level. I don't think anybody who's supporting preschool or earlier education for young children thinks it has to be strictly a government program. The fact is the scale of the program suggests government activity will be an important component. Government in the sense of financing, tax-based support. But when let me come back to the 7-to-1 that you mentioned. That 7-to-1 figure includes the very kind of costs that the congressman earlier in this segment was talking about. It includes the deadweight loss of taxes. So we include the fact that when you tax, you distort the economy, and the 7-to-1 survives even that test. So it's a pretty strong test. I feel that if you look at these returns, that they will stand up a pretty close scrutiny. This wasn't a peer-reviewed article where my friends were not. This wasn't an advocacy blog, a post. This was actually a refereed article in an economics journal.
I accept it was good research, but I mean, the Perry preschool, the teachers went home with the kids once a week, spent an hour and a half with the mom and the child. This is expensive. It was really intensive. They got results.
Well, let's be careful. It's no more expensive in a per capita basis today than what we spend on elementary school students in most states around the country. Okay?
$10,000 or so per student.
$9,000 to $10,000 is about what you'll find for the average student across states. It varies. Connecticut spends a lot, you know, and other states spend less. But the fact is that's not any higher. But see, this is the point I think you really are missing. And I completely with you. There's a lot of waste in government programs. But I think what's necessary to do is say, what are the benefits that come from it, and then compare that to the cost. It's not just a matter of cost. Look, I bought a new car. That car costs thousands of dollars. If I just looked at the cost, I'd say, what a waste of money. I just have a car, and I spent thousands of my dollars. I could be doing something else with it. But that car also gives me services. It lets me drive. It lets me be here on this television station.
Well, I'm happy for your car, but 2 states, Oklahoma and Georgia, have had preschool now for 15 years. The result, lots of money spent, nothing is better. We're out of time for this. Thank you, Professor Heckman. Coming up, I should be happy because the president wants to give more money to me. However deep in debt America is now, there's no doubt that it will soon get much bigger because of me. Well, not just me, but I'm a baby boomer. My big generation's about to retire and collect Social Security and Medicare. And there's no pool of money to pay for our retirement. Yes, the government took money out of our paychecks for 40 years for what they said was Social Security and Medicare. But they didn't save it or invest it. They spent it right then, right that year. There's no trust fund. Now the government says my retirement must be funded by you young people. But how can you possibly afford that? The politicians have promised my age group trillions of dollars, much more than exists. Evan Feinberg of a group called Generation Opportunity is justifiably upset by this. Your group calls it a war on youth? But geezers like me paid into the system. We deserve your money.
Well, there's no doubt there's a war on youth being perpetrated by politicians right now, where they're spending my future away and spending my current opportunity away on things that aren't making my life any better.
Makes my life better. Can I have your wallet just to take a look at it there? Because what's really happening is you, who I presume are not as affluent as I, are giving me money.
That's a pretty unfortunate place to be for my generation. We've got 16% unemployment. A third of us are being forced to move back in with our parents. And politicians are unfortunately bribing your generation and stealing my future in an effort to put their next election before the next generation.
But some of my generation is poor, and they worked all their life, and they were promised Medicare.
Sure, and that's why I think we need to keep our promises and start restructuring and reforming our entitlement programs to keep promises we've made.
How?
But we're not keeping the promises to the next generation. I think there's a lot of really good policy proposals on the table to restructure. You know, I think Paul
raise the retirement age?
Absolutely. I think it's a common sense reform to slowly increase the retirement age while starting to means test benefits to make sure Social Security and Medicare are really helping those truly in need. But if we're going to help those that are truly in need, we need to start putting the next generation first.
There are reforms, and when President Obama ran for president, he said he was going to tackle entitlements during his first term.
We're going to have to take on entitlements, and I think we've got to do it quickly. I'd like to do it in my first term as president.
Yeah, well, that didn't happen. Then 3 years later, the president said he was willing to at least reduce the growth of Social Security.
It turns out that making some modest modifications in those entitlements can save you trillions of dollars.
But on this budget, he backed down from that, too. This is the cost of living adjustment.
Absolutely. He's backed away from even the most modest of reforms, slowing the growth in Social Security benefits by 1/3 of 1%. And now he's backed away from that. We've got really big problems facing our economy, facing our future generation, and the president and politicians as a whole are really refusing to make even the most modest reforms.
So I don't see how it's going to work out. People want more money to fight Putin, pay for the military, who want to help poor people. I think you're toast, and you're committed to help my generation. And entitlement reform does seem to be political suicide.
Years ago, when a powerful majority leader proposed a modest reform, elderly people surrounded his car and screamed at him. He had to drive to a gas station to escape, and he canceled the reform. More recently, when Representative Paul Ryan proposed to rein in spending, a left-wing group ran this morbid ad.
Boy, if you want to reform retirements, you're pushing an elderly lady off a cliff.
Well, I'll tell you who's really getting thrown off a cliff and really getting thrown under the bus, and that's my generation, who's being saddled with all of these bills. A previous guest talked about the $205 trillion that we're going to have to pay back in the future because of promises we made. There's not enough money in the world, as you put it. My generation is getting thrown under the bus in an effort to make sure we don't even make the most modest reforms to our entitlement programs.
And you hinted at Ryan's idea. His point is that these programs, which say, we'll just take care of you, encourage people to be dependent.
Absolutely. I think Congressman Ryan's really led the way to start opening a discussion about how we restructure just how we pay for these programs to make sure they help those most in need and make sure they're really targeting benefits in a really efficient way. And I think it's really a great start to the conversation.
Thank you, Evan. I'll give you your money back. I'm sorry I took it.
I appreciate that very much.
When I retire, it's going to come back to me. Next, Ron Paul will give his spin on the so-called shrinking of the military. There is one part of the government that will be hit with big budget cuts. At least that's the impression you get from the media. The Pentagon plans to shrink Army to pre-World War II level. That's from the New York Times. Here's a report from Fox News.
The Army would shrink by 80,000 troops. The A-10 Warthog, a Cold War tank killer, would be retired, and the U-2 spy plane would be replaced by an unmanned vehicle. It's the new face of the trimmed-down military.
That's true, but it doesn't mean they're going to spend less. The Secretary of Defense just said today's military can fight with fewer people because technology does more.
What you're equipped to do, how you're led, the equipment that you have, the modernization, the technology versus what our Army looked like in 1939 and 1940. I mean, there's no comparison.
So, fewer troops if Congress approves. Former Congressman Ron Paul, now host of the Ron Paul Channel, says that's long overdue. Ron?
Hello there, yes.
You've called for this for a long time. You happy?
Well, if it really would happen, it might be, the right way to go. I just don't believe in this. Remember, Rumsfeld was talking something like this a few years ago. It never happened. And now I hear that report said they were going to cut 80,000. I saw 40,000, unless the Congress changes their mind. The Congress will. This is just an excuse to pretend they're cutting in one area for the purpose of buying more weaponry and, get change in, more of this military-industrial complex funding. That's what they want.
They do admit they're going to spend $28 billion more.
Right. They are. They aren't really cutting anything, and they want to pretend to downsize the amount of personnel. Well, my argument is they should downsize the foreign policy. If we're going to be the policemen of the world, like right now, we're sending a destroyer over to the Black Sea. That's important. We have to be safe, and that F-35, $400 billion boondoggle, we need that. We want to feel safe here at home. So I guess the American people are saying keep spending. They've just recently voted to give aid to you in Ukraine, and where are we going to get the money? So it never ends, and that's why I predict it won't end until we have a declared bankruptcy with the destruction of the dollar. And at the rate they're going, they're working real hard on that.
And yet, Dick Cheney says about these planned cuts in personnel, this is absolutely dangerous. Lindsey Graham says it guts our defense.
Well, I think they're smoking something. It's dangerous if we keep doing what we're doing. How can it be dangerous? Who's going to invade us? Who's going to lob missiles at us? In the 1960s, the Cold War was ongoing, and I was, drafted during the Cuban crisis. I think that was a lot different than now. We don't have that, but it looks like we're going abroad searching for monsters, to destroy and to fight and looking for our next battle, just so the budget would pass. Somebody said once to me many years ago, there will always be an incident about the time the budget comes up to make sure that nothing ever gets cut out of the military budget. So we have an incident going on. We've gone around and they have to scare us. How did they get us to the people to go along with a war they really shouldn't have gone along with Iraq? Was to scare everybody, intimidate everybody. We were about to be attacked. Saddam Hussein was on our doorstep. We were going to be hit by a nuclear weapon. So it's ongoing. What I can't quite understand is why do the people keep believing these stories? And I think
people watch the news and they see these poor people in the Ukraine being run over, and they say we should do something. Putin's this terrible guy. It's why we have to be big and strong.
Well, what they need to do is not be so naive as to believe everything that they hear on the television. And that's been one of my goals, is try to neutralize this, as you do so often with your program, because you're rather unique in presenting this case in opposition to some of this spending. But unfortunately, people are still going along with it. But I might say, I don't think it's as bad as it used to be. I think we've made some inroads. When the time came to bomb Syria, Syria, the American people spoke out, and Obama backed off, and the Congress backed off. But then again, yelling and screaming by the warmongers, oh, he's a weak president. Well, you know what? When you stand up against these special interests who are always lobbying for more war, I would say that takes a little strength. So we need to stand up against these privileged groups who just want more spending, more war profits, more antagonism.
You wrote recently, military spending is also welfare. Welfare for the well-connected military-industrial complex.
Yes, and this is something that conservatives frequently forget. We, as conservatives, have talked a lot about Keynesianism, welfareism, and conservatives are very good at this. No more welfare, no more food stamps, don't take care of child health care anymore. But it's sacred that you keep the military-industrial complex going, even on weapons you don't need. And I think the F-35 is a typical example of that. But that's Keynesianism. If you go around the country, you'll find out, well, you can't close this down. These are jobs. These are defense jobs. It's important. And it's also the reason the F-35 is being built in 46 different states.
Yeah, that's amazing. So each state has a reason to fight for it. Thank you, Ron Paul. Thank you for being such a consistent voice for reason.
Thank you, John.
Later in the show, countries that prospered because their politicians actually cut spending. But next, spending that most Americans love.
Rebuilding America's infrastructure. Our roads, our bridges, our rails, our ports.
Is it good if they spend more on infrastructure?
I think we have to spend more on infrastructure. I think we have to spend a little in order in the long run to make a little more.
Spending on infrastructure is popular. New roads, better bridges, everyone likes that. And so politicians promise it all the time.
Rebuilding America's infrastructure. Our roads, our bridges, our rails, our ports, our airports, our schools, our power grids. We've got a lot of work to do out there, and we got to put folks to work.
Put folks to work? What's wrong with that? Well, plenty, says economist Ben Powell. What do you mean?
He's putting the cart before the horse here. So one sign, actually, of an economic illiterate is someone who lists jobs as a benefit of their policy. Jobs are a cost of a policy, not a benefit. The benefit is the good or service that society gets from that job being done. Let me give you an example from the private sector, John, and then we can compare that to a government job creation program. So your show here, right, the value of this show is that hopefully it's in people's living rooms tonight and they're enjoying watching it and getting some information too. But the cost is you've got people behind the camera here doing work. You know, your producers have
It's good that I have a job.
But you're doing something that takes you away from other activities you'd rather be doing. I mean, you're hanging out with a boring economist here in the studio instead of doing something fun on of all days, your birthday, right? And here I am. You're a swell
birthday.
You're a swell guy. I like hanging out with you, but I've been away from home for 4 days. My little boy misses me. I'd like to be with him. Our employers pay us for bearing these costs to provide value to society. In the private sector, we have a profit and loss system that says, hey, if Fox makes money by bringing this show to people's house, that tells us that.
But back to infrastructure.
Okay, back to infrastructure. When listen, if the government should be doing infrastructure for jobs, we're building roads the wrong way, John. I don't know what they're doing with all this Caterpillar equipment. Obama should get rid of all of that and hand the people shovels and let them try to start clearing the land
that
with
would be even more jobs.
And forget the shovels, give them spoons, right? Think of how much work they'd have to do on their hands and knees to scrape together a little road. But in the end, right, the benefit to society would be the road, not the work that was done. Instead, everybody just had a lot more cost of doing work.
We want the infrastructure.
So if we want the infrastructure, you justify it by arguing for the benefits of the infrastructure, not for job creation.
Well, they do both. When President Obama talked about rebuilding America's infrastructure, it almost sounded like it was a new idea. But listen to him 5 years ago, and every year.
We are remaking the American landscape with the largest new investment in our nation's infrastructure. I am announcing a new plan for rebuilding and modernizing America's roads and rails and runways for the long term. We'll put more Americans to work repairing crumbling roads and bridges. So much of America needs to be rebuilt. We've got crumbling roads and bridges to put people to work as soon as possible on our most urgent repairs.
It's again and again. It's like a mantra, a chant.
Yeah, you know, one different definition of insanity, right, is trying to do the same thing again and again and expecting different results. Now, of course,
doesn't government have to build roads and bridges?
He argues for these things for like economic recovery, right? We had the reconstruction effort after the recession. If you had looked at Japan in the 1990s, they did tons of infrastructure projects to try to get out of their recession. It didn't work. In fact, we know we had a housing bubble here in the United States, or virtually everybody appreciates that now. But that means people and capital were pulled into the wrong sectors, too much in construction, housing, related industries. The good news is we didn't have to like shoot the people or burn the houses afterwards. What we have to do is reallocate them to other places in the economy. But these types of programs that force resources back into those industries prevent that needed recovery and reallocation, the cleansing after the recession.
And a lot of infrastructure never happened after the orgy of stimulus spending in 2009. Turned out that less was repaired than they'd planned, and unemployment rose from 8 to 9%. The president was asked, what happened?
Shovel-ready was not as shovel-ready as we expected.
Listen, so infrastructure is important, John, but why do we think government has a comparative advantage in producing infrastructure?
The private sector used to build most of the roads.
You know, as a percent of the economy at the time, the Colonial Turnpike system that was privately provided was larger than the Eisenhower interstate system when it came into being. And we don't have to go back to colonial times. Right now, there's a private company in France that constructs, operates 500 miles of private toll roads around France, and they do it more efficiently. In fact, we have examples in the United States. In California, there was SR 71 in California that was a private road constructed in the middle of a government highway, and they brought us innovations like electronic tolling with overhead cameras so that you don't have to stop at booths, flexible pricing so that in high rush hour times prices were higher. Now, of course, governments could do these things, but they don't have the profit incentive to, so they're not as innovative.
And they waste money doing it.
Always.
Well, thank you, Ben Powell. We'll try to rethink that next. I'll reduce our debt because it turns out cutting is good for us.
The minute you walked in the joint, I could see you were a man of distinction, a real big spender, good looking, so refined. Say, wouldn't you like to know what's going on in my mind? So let me get right.
I'll tell you what's going on in my mind. Politicians should stop these debates about whether to increase spending 6% or 7%. Obama's budget proposes 6.8%. Inflation's less than 2%. They must increase spending by triple the rate of inflation? It's always more, and this is nuts. We should learn from countries like our neighbor to the north. Years ago, Canada cut spending. Real cuts, not the fake Washington cuts where they say, well, we plan to increase spending $10 billion, but now we'll just increase it $9 billion, so we really cut $1 billion. No, they increased it, $9. Canada, however, made actual cuts. They cut the Agriculture Department 22%, fisheries 27%, natural resources down almost 50%. Why did they do it? Because their politicians were more sensible than ours. They acknowledged that their spending was going to eat their future.
In the mid-90s, Canada's finance minister said, "We are in debt up to our eyeballs. That can't be sustained." Their debt level was just as bad as ours is today, almost 70% of their economy.
When I was growing up in Canada, people who went on unemployment insurance were said to go in the pogey. You could work as little as 8 weeks, taking the rest of the year off.
What would they do?
Curling, playing hockey.
They play hockey all year?
Oh, yeah.
No work for most of the year. So, in 1995, Canadian leaders cut unemployment benefits and other programs, and as you see here, Canada's debt stopped increasing. And as Canada ran budget surpluses, its debt's been going down.
And things got better.
Things got better. The economy boomed in the 90s. Think about what government does. Government wastes most of what it spends. And so just cutting government spending and having that money be in the hands of people means it's going to be used more valuably.
Although Canada fired government workers, unemployment didn't increase, it dropped from 12% to 6%. When people are free to spend their own money, life gets better. More recently, during the worldwide recession when President Obama increased spending with the massive stimulus, Germany and Sweden cut spending. Yes, Sweden, formerly known as the big welfare state. Did those cuts hurt economic growth? No, the opposite. Sweden's economy grew faster than any other in Europe. Both Germany and Sweden recovered faster than America, despite our expensive stimulus. And even the United States tried this approach once, sort of. When the Cold War ended, the first President Bush reduced military spending, and then a Republican Congress kept President Clinton's spending in check. Spending still increased, but not as fast as the economy grew. The result? A balanced budget and a booming economy. When people are free to spend their own money, life gets better. We know what works. But it's not intuitive to people. Well, to you Stossel viewers maybe, but not to normal, less informed people. Most Americans see problems and just assume government must be the answer. That's why I wrote this book. When politicians say, we can solve your problems, we should say, no, they can't. Individuals solve problems. Governments fail. The politicians don't want to hear that because they like spending other people's money. Who doesn't? But it's not right, and it doesn't even work. That's why I say, hey, big spenders, just stop it. That's our show. See you next week.